The city of New York never really sleeps. At night, it doesn't rest. It broods. From the top of a Brooklyn rooftop, you can see the towers glowing like cold fires against a black sky, each window a silent witness to someone's secret. The streets below hum with restless taxis and hurried footsteps, the kind of pulse that tells you every soul here is fighting for something. Money, love, power, or survival. And over all of it, my voice breaks through, steady but tinged with disbelief.
My name is Amelia Torres. I'm 30 years old, a journalist who digs into what people would rather bury. I never imagined the day would come when I'd be the buried one, hidden, discarded by my own blood. I never thought family, the word I clung to in my loneliest hours, would cut me deeper than any enemy I've ever exposed. As the words spill out, the camera doesn't linger on the skyline. It dives downward, past the glass towers, into the narrow veins of Manhattan. Neon lights flicker against rain-slicked sidewalks. A newspaper stand still carries the ink of headlines, corruption trials, bankruptcies, scandals. They could all have been mine, stories I'd once chased. But tonight, the story isn't on the front page. Tonight, it begins with me. The voice continues, carrying the weight of confession. Family dinners were supposed to be safe havens. Laughter, shared stories, the scent of roasted garlic and wine. But mine became an arena, a performance, and in that theater I was no more than an unwanted guest. The flashback begins. A warm chandelier hangs over a long oak dining table, polished until it gleams. The plates shimmer with silver trim, the wine glasses already half full. My mother sits at the head, regal, flawless as always, with her pearls catching the light. Next to her, my younger sister Emma glows with practiced charm, her hand resting delicately over the wrist of her husband Jonathan, a man whose smile is all confidence and calculation. Their laughter fills the room, rising like a tide, drowning every attempt I make to feel present. I sit opposite them, silent, watching. I'm holding a glass of water, not wine, though no one notices. The food on my plate is untouched. The knife and fork lie crossed as if in surrender. The conversation swirls around me like smoke, impossible to grasp. Emma tells a story about Jonathan's latest deal, something about investors and expansion, the kind of words my mother drinks like champagne. She laughs on cue, her eyes bright with approval. "That's exactly the kind of ambition your father admired," she says, and her hand squeezes Jonathan's as though he's already the rightful heir to everything my father built. I want to speak, to remind her that I too carry my father's blood, that I inherited his tenacity, his obsession with truth. But when I open my mouth, Emma cuts me off effortlessly, sliding into the next anecdote, this one about a charity gala. Everyone laughs again, as if scripted. The spotlight never leaves them. I am just a shadow at the edge of the table. Do you remember when Dad used to sit there? I almost whisper it, but no one hears. His chair, my father's chair, is now occupied by Jonathan. His posture, easy yet claiming authority, sends a cold shiver down my spine. The seat isn't just wood and leather. It's a throne. And tonight, I realize I've been dethroned in silence. My mother's eyes find me once, briefly, across the candles. There's no warmth in them, only irritation, as though my very presence is a disruption to the harmony she carefully orchestrates. "Why don't you tell us about your work, Amelia?" she asks finally, her tone too sweet. I feel the trap beneath it. The last time I tried, she dismissed it as sensationalist nonsense. But before I can respond, Emma leans in, her smile sharp. "Oh, Mom, let's not bore Jonathan with stories of criminals and conspiracy. He's had enough paperwork for one day." Their laughter follows again, and the spotlight shifts back. I swallow my words,
my pride burning in silence.
And then the memory sharpens like a knife. Jonathan raising his glass, looking around the table, his voice warm but heavy with possession. "To family," he says, "to new beginnings." The irony twists in my chest because this toast is not to all of us. It's a coronation, a declaration that the family has redefined itself, with me on the outside. The camera lingers on my face, the half smile I force, the quick blink to hide the sting in my eyes. My fork trembles slightly as I set it down. I watch as Emma leans into Jonathan's shoulder. My mother beams, and the sound of clinking glasses rings like a verdict. The voiceover cuts through the scene again, steady, but edged with sorrow. That was the night everything cracked. The night I realized that blood is not thicker than ambition, that loyalty in this house is negotiable, and I was never part of the bargain. The dining room fades into darkness, and only my voice remains. But nothing could have prepared me for what came after, for the words that would seal my fate and bury every illusion I still clung to. The last image is a close-up of the table, the polished surface reflecting the smiles of my family, while my own reflection blurs, fading out entirely. And then, with a single beat of silence, my voice delivers the blow. But that dinner, that single night, destroyed every last belief I had in family. The screen cuts to black. The music rises low and ominous, carrying the weight of inevitability. The stage is set. The betrayal is only beginning. Amelia Torres was never the golden child. Her childhood in the Torres household was an endless theater of comparisons, where every laugh, every achievement, every fleeting glance of approval from her mother seemed to belong exclusively to Emma. Amelia was the elder, born with sharp eyes that noticed everything, a mind that refused to be silent, and a heart that beat restlessly for acknowledgement. But none of that mattered in a house where appearances outweighed substance. From the time she was old enough to sit at the dinner table, Amelia understood the unspoken hierarchy. Emma was the darling. Amelia was the lesson. Emma brought home painted drawings of flowers. Her mother kissed her forehead, hung them on the refrigerator with magnetic pride. Amelia brought home essays that won competitions. Her mother frowned, asked why her handwriting looked so stern. Emma stumbled through piano scales, rewarded with applause for effort. Amelia mastered violin pieces with precision. Her mother asked why the sound felt too cold. And yet there had been one anchor, her father, a man with quiet strength, who worked late but always carved out a piece of his evenings to sit by Amelia's side, listening to her stories of school, of books, of the mysteries she longed to solve. "You see things others don't," he would tell her, voice steady, eyes soft. "That will be your gift, Amelia. Don't let anyone convince you it's a burden." In his approval, she found enough fuel to keep enduring the coldness of her mother's sharp tongue and the shadow cast by Emma's favored presence. He saw her, not just the child she was, but the woman she might become. When he died, the light in her world dimmed irreversibly. The funeral was cloaked in black and silence. But what Amelia remembered most was not the prayers, nor the flowers, nor even the grave itself. What she remembered was the way her mother clutched Emma's hand, not hers. How Emma leaned against Jonathan, already the protector, already the one deemed strong enough to carry the family forward. Amelia stood alone, her father's last words echoing in her chest like a secret oath. Never abandon the truth, even if the truth abandons you. By the age of 30, Amelia had built herself from those words. She had forged a career out of uncovering what others wished hidden: political bribes, corporate fraud,
police cover-ups. Her byline was feared in certain corners of New York, whispered about in corridors of power. Yet none of that mattered when she returned home. To her mother, Amelia was still the difficult daughter, the one who never smiled enough, never dressed soft enough, never bent easily enough to fit the image of a woman her mother respected. Emma, however, was everything her mother wanted in a daughter. Emma Torres had inherited beauty like a weapon. She walked into a room and people leaned closer. Her laugh was never too loud, never too shrill, always calibrated, always drawing attention. Teachers adored her, neighbors praised her, and relatives at family gatherings whispered about her potential. Unlike Amelia's stubborn intelligence, Emma's talents lay in knowing when to perform, when to retreat, and when to strike. She learned early that charm opens doors faster than honesty, and she wielded it with the precision of a blade wrapped in silk. As adults, the contrast between the sisters only grew sharper. While Amelia dug through court files and crime scenes, Emma cultivated a different empire, one built on connections, appearances, and proximity to wealth. Her marriage to Jonathan wasn't just love, it was strategy. He was older, established, radiating the kind of power that turned heads. To outsiders, Emma and Jonathan were the picture of a perfect couple. Beautiful, successful, destined for influence. To Amelia, they were the embodiment of everything corrosive: ambition without conscience, charm without loyalty. Jonathan Montgomery was the kind of man who could talk a judge into smiling while stealing the ground beneath his feet. He was polished, every hair in place, every gesture calculated. He didn't just shake hands. He made people feel indebted after touching his palm. Behind the tailored suits and the gleaming cufflinks, however, was a hunger that never ended. Money wasn't enough. He needed control. Influence wasn't enough. He needed obedience. The deals he struck in daylight were only half of his empire. The other half lived in shadows, unspoken favors, whispered threats, envelopes slipped under doors. He thrived in the cracks of the law where greed dressed itself as opportunity. Amelia saw him for what he was the first time they met. His eyes lingered too long, not in lust, but in calculation, as though he were sizing her up, deciding whether she was a threat or an asset. And when he realized she was neither in his world, he dismissed her with a smile that felt like a warning. To her mother, Jonathan was the son she never had, eloquent, successful, always aware of appearances. To Emma, he was a shield, a platform, and a mirror reflecting back the image she craved. And so, dinner after dinner, gathering after gathering, Amelia found herself seated across from a table where she no longer belonged. The mother, who once corrected Amelia's posture with a sharp hand on the shoulder, now leaned in close to Jonathan, whispering with pride about Emma's social calendar. The sister, who once clung to Amelia's hand during thunderstorms, now clung to her husband's arm, eyes gleaming with shared secrets. And Amelia, with her investigative mind that had cracked scandals wide open, sat with silence lodged in her throat, realizing that the one arena she could not conquer was the battlefield of her own family. Her mother had become the guardian of reputation. In that household, dignity was measured not by integrity, but by appearances. The Torres name had to remain spotless in the eyes of society, even if that meant bleaching away the presence of a daughter who refused to conform. Her mother had mastered the art of subtle cruelty. Praise for Emma flowed like wine, abundant and easy. For Amelia, the words were measured, clipped. designed to remind her that she was out of sync with what mattered. "You're too serious, Amelia. No man will tolerate that sharp tongue. Do you really think people want to hear about corruption over dinner?" Each sentence was a dismissal dressed as advice, and every family meal became a courtroom where Amelia was judged guilty of existing wrong. She would sit at the long table, its surface gleaming like a mirror, reflecting back her isolation. Laughter circled around her like a conversation in another language. Emma's stories about galas, Jonathan's tales of business, her mother's sharp interjections, all threads woven into a tapestry that had no space for Amelia. When she tried to add a thread of her own, the silence that followed was heavier than mockery. It was indifference, the cruelest exile of all. In those moments, Amelia understood she wasn't just left out, she was erased. Her childhood had been a plea for recognition, her adulthood a battle for truth. And yet, under her mother's roof, she was still that little girl at the dinner table, watching her sister praised for drawing flowers, while her own victories lay invisible in the shadows. The ache of it pressed against her ribs, a reminder that some wounds don't close with age. By the 10th minute of this journey, the stage is set. Amelia the truth seeker, Emma the charmer turned conspirator, Jonathan the predator in a suit, and the mother, the gatekeeper of reputation, blind to love but obsessed with image. Together they form the world Amelia must confront, a world where loyalty is a currency, betrayal is inevitable, and the very meaning of family has been rewritten without her consent. And somewhere beneath it all, the seed of war is already sown. Not with shouts or blows, but with silence, indifference, and the invisible knife of exclusion. Amelia doesn't yet know it, but her fight won't just be for inheritance or justice. It will be for something more fragile, more devastating. The right to exist in the family she once called her own. The announcement came with the calmness of a weather report, as if Emma were reciting a line from a prepared script. She sat straighter at the dinner table, her manicured nails grazing the stem of her wineglass, her lips curling into a smile that felt rehearsed. "By the way," she said casually, "Daddy had already transferred all of his assets before he passed. It was his decision to secure Jonathan's business expansion. Everything has been settled. There won't be any complications moving forward." For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. The chandelier above flickered faintly. Or maybe it was just Amelia's vision, blurring with disbelief. Her fork slipped against her plate, the clang louder than it should have been. She searched her mother's face for contradiction, some flicker of surprise. But Elaine nodded, as if the matter were already a closed chapter. Jonathan's hand rested lightly over Emma's, a gesture so intimate it felt staged for the audience. He didn't even look at Amelia, only at his glass, as though the announcement concerned no one but himself. Amelia's voice cut through the silence, sharp and trembling. "What do you mean, transferred? Dad never mentioned anything about handing over his assets. He was sick, yes, but he wasn't incapable of making decisions." Emma's smile widened, her eyes narrowing with that familiar gleam of superiority. "He wanted to protect us, Amelia. Protect me. He knew Jonathan's business needed security, and he trusted him. It was his final act of responsibility. It was a dagger wrapped in velvet. The words were meant to sound noble, but underneath them lay something rotten." Amelia felt the pulse in her neck hammering, her chest tightening. Protect us? No. Protect you. Protect Jonathan. Not once had her father suggested such a drastic move. And if he had, why hadn't he told her? The daughter who had sat at his bedside night after night in those final weeks, holding his frail hand, reading the news aloud when his voice was too weak. "I don't believe you," Amelia whispered. Jonathan finally lifted his gaze, a slow smirk spreading across his face. "You don't have to believe it. It's documented. Signed. legal.
Her mother interjected quickly, shutting down the space Amelia tried to claim. It's true, Amelia. The paperwork is clear. Your father wanted stability for this family. Jonathan provides that. You live in your own world. He knew where the future belonged. The finality of her mother's words landed heavier than Emma's announcement. For a split second, Amelia thought she might suffocate. The chair beneath her felt suddenly unsteady, as though the ground itself had shifted. The family home, the memories of her father, the small fragments of belonging she still clung to, all of it was slipping away. Her appetite vanished. Her throat tightened against tears she refused to let fall in front of them. She swallowed the fury like a bitter pill, keeping her face calm enough to pass for indifference. But inside, the ground cracked open. That night, long after the laughter of Emma and Jonathan's victory had faded into silence, Amelia sat in her childhood room, the dim glow of a desk lamp illuminating stacks of dusty boxes. Her hands trembled as she pulled one open, the scent of old paper and mothballs rising like ghosts. Her father's files, his handwriting, his meticulous notes, the kind of organization that only a man obsessed with detail could leave behind. Amelia's pulse steadied with a kind of purpose she hadn't felt in months. If Emma was right, if everything had been transferred, there would be proof here, and if she was lying, the truth would be here too. Hours blurred as Amelia sifted through folders, contracts, receipts, ledgers. Each page was a piece of her father's mind, carefully catalogued. Then she found it. An envelope marked with bold letters, Property Trust 2019. Her breath caught. Inside lay a copy of the transfer agreement Emma had bragged about. She scanned the document, her eyes tracing the familiar scrawl of her father's name at the bottom. But something was wrong. The R in Torres curved upward unnaturally. The S dragged in a way it never had. Amelia froze, her chest tightening with dread. She pulled another folder, an old letter her father had written her years before. She laid the two signatures side by side under the lamp's unforgiving light. The difference screamed at her. Her father's hand had been steady, deliberate, even in illness. The signature on the contract was sloppy, mechanical, too perfect in its imperfection, as though someone had practiced the flaws without ever knowing the man who created them. It wasn't his. It couldn't be. Her breath grew shallow, fury rising like heat in her veins. They had forged it. Someone had dared to take his name, his dignity, and use it to strip her of everything. She pressed her palms against the desk, the anger trembling through her bones. She whispered into the empty room, "You didn't sign this, Dad. They stole you." The betrayal burned brighter with every second. Her sister, her own blood, had delivered the lie with such ease. And Jonathan? He hadn't even flinched. That confidence wasn't born of truth. It was born of certainty that no one would challenge him. But Amelia wasn't no one. She dug deeper, rifling through the files until another name emerged. The signature of the notary, the witness, and there, scrawled neatly at the bottom of the page, was the name she recognized instantly: Michael Adler, Esquire, the family lawyer, her father's old friend, the man who had once sat in their living room, sipping coffee, chuckling at Amelia's teenage rants about politics and justice, the man who had guided her father through contracts, taxes, wills. He had been part of the family's fabric, woven into their trust. And now, his signature was the key to their undoing. The lamp flickered as Amelia stared at the paper, bile rising in her throat. Michael Adler wasn't just complicit, he was the architect. Without him, the contract would never have passed scrutiny. Without him, Emma and Jonathan wouldn't have dared. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat echoing the same truth. Her father had been betrayed, not just by strangers, but by the very people he trusted most. His friend, his daughter. His legacy sold off like stock in a failing company. Amelia pressed the papers flat against the desk, her jaw tightening. She whispered again, not as a confession this time, but as a vow. I will not let them bury you in lies. The silence of the room deepened, heavy with the weight of the discovery. Outside, New York pulsed with its usual indifference, but in that small bedroom a war had begun. A journalist's war, sharpened by grief, driven by blood. And in that war, Amelia was no longer just the forgotten daughter. She was the witness, the avenger. The clock struck midnight, but Amelia did not rest. She gathered the documents, slid them into her leather satchel, and sat back with eyes burning, not from fatigue, but from purpose. Emma's voice replayed in her mind like poison. Everything has been settled, but Amelia knew better now. Nothing was settled. The real story was just beginning. The confrontation erupted in the Torres' dining room, the same room where Amelia had spent her childhood listening to her father's deep, comforting voice. But now that room felt like a courtroom in which she had been cast as the accused. Papers clutched tightly in her hand, her pulse pounding with fury. Amelia threw the contract onto the polished oak table. The lamp above flickered across its surface, illuminating the signature that mocked her father's memory. This isn't real, she said, her voice low but trembling with conviction. This is forged. Dad never signed this. You know it as well as I do. Her mother's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening into the same disapproving line Amelia had known since childhood. Elaine Torres didn't look at the document. She looked at her daughter as if she were a stranger trespassing in her own house. Stop this nonsense, she hissed. You're so desperate to discredit Emma, to sabotage what she's built, that you would spit on your father's memory. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. I'm trying to honor his memory. You're the ones who let Jonathan and Emma bury him under lies. Look at the signature, Mom. Just look at it. You've seen Dad write his name 1,000 times. That isn't his hand. But Elaine didn't glance at the page. Her voice rose, sharp and merciless.
Enough, Amelia. You've always been jealous, always bitter because Emma shines brighter. And now, even after your father is gone, you can't resist trying to poison this family with your accusations. You don't want truth. You want to destroy Emma's happiness.
The words landed like blows. Destroy Emma's happiness. That was the accusation. Not fraud, not greed, not betrayal, just Amelia, the troublemaker, the shadow. Her hands shook with rage. This isn't about jealousy. This is about theft. This is about Jonathan taking everything Dad worked for and twisting it into leverage. And you! She turned, her voice cracking. You're letting him. Her mother slammed her hand against the table, rattling the glasses. Do not raise your voice in this house. As long as I draw breath, I will protect Emma. She is building a family, a future. And what are you building? Scandals in newspapers, enemies in high places? Don't stand there pretending to be righteous when all you've done is isolate yourself. Amelia's throat tightened. Her chest ached with the realization that the gulf between them wasn't just widening, it had been there all along. Her mother would never see her, never believe her. The family line had been drawn, and she was on the wrong side of it. Before Amelia could speak again, Jonathan's voice slithered into the space like smoke. Maybe it's time we put an end to this charade. She turned sharply. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his face calm, almost amused. His hand brushed the contract as though it were nothing more than a dinner bill.
Amelia, rummaging through your father's old files in the middle of the night, sneaking into places that aren't yours. What do you think people will say when they hear about it?
Her pulse spiked. You can twist this however you want, but I have proof.
Jonathan's smile grew. Proof? Or stolen documents? Because from where I stand, it looks like you broke into private files. That's a crime. Tampering with legal paperwork? That's a felony. Amelia felt the room tilt. She glanced at her mother, at Emma, waiting for someone, anyone, to reject his words. But her mother's silence was heavy with complicity, and Emma's gaze flickered only briefly before settling back into Jonathan's.
You wouldn't dare, Amelia whispered.
Jonathan leaned forward, lowering his voice, his eyes glinting with the thrill of power. Wouldn't I? You're a journalist, Amelia. Everyone knows your reputation for digging where you don't belong. It won't take much to convince the police that you fabricated this whole thing to get attention. And when that happens, all your credibility, all your precious integrity, gone.
The words were still echoing when 2 sharp knocks rattled the front door. Amelia's stomach dropped.
She knew before it opened what was waiting. The sound of heavy shoes on hardwood, the murmur of uniforms, and then the flash of badges.
Amelia Torres? One officer asked, his tone detached, professional.
We need you to come with us. You're under investigation for unlawful access to private documents and tampering with legal contracts.
For a second, Amelia couldn't move.
Her body felt rooted to the ground. She looked at her mother, silently pleading. She looked at Emma, hoping for a crack of doubt. She even looked at Jonathan, praying for a smirk that would reveal this was some twisted bluff. But her mother only crossed her arms. Emma's lips pressed into a thin line, and Jonathan gave her a slow nod, as if to say, "Checkmate."
No, Amelia whispered. No, this isn't. The officer's hand rested on her shoulder.
Ma'am, you need to come with us.
The cold metal cuffs clicked shut around her wrists.
A sound that tore through her chest like lightning. Amelia's breath stuttered as she looked back one last time. Her mother's eyes were hard, unreadable. Emma turned away. Jonathan's smirk carved itself into her memory. As they led her out into the night, Amelia realized she wasn't just being arrested. She was being erased. The police car door slammed shut, sealing her inside. The hum of the city outside dulled into nothing but vibrations. Blurred lights streaking past the window as the car pulled away. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Haunted, broken, but still burning with something fierce. In the precinct, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, cold and merciless. They fingerprinted her, photographed her, stripped her down to a number on a form. When the cell door clanged shut, the sound reverberated through her bones. The concrete walls were chipped, the air stale. The cot was a slab of steel disguised as a bed. Amelia sat on it, the cuffs finally removed, her hands raw where the metal had bitten into her skin. The silence pressed down hard. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady the storm in her chest. Anger, fear, betrayal. It all twisted together until she could hardly breathe. Her family hadn't just turned their backs on her. They had delivered her into the hands of the law as if she were a criminal. Her eyes closed, tears hot against her lashes. And then in the darkness of her memory, she heard his voice, her father's voice. Justice isn't always in the family, Amelia. Sometimes you won't find it around the table you grew up at. Sometimes you'll have to find it in the truth itself. And the truth will cost you. But it's worth it. The memory was so vivid she could almost feel his hand on hers again. Warm, steady, reassuring. She remembered the last night at his bedside, when his voice had been frail but his eyes unflinching. Don't let them silence you. Even if the world brands you a liar, even if your own blood betrays you, remember, truth is your inheritance. A shaky breath left her chest. The cell was still cold, still merciless. But her father's words ignited a fire inside her ribcage. She straightened her back. Her family had branded her the enemy. Jonathan had used his influence to frame her. The law had shackled her wrists. But none of it erased the fact that the contract was forged, that her father's name had been desecrated, that the truth was still alive, waiting for her to drag it into the light.
Amelia pressed her palms against her knees, whispering into the cell's emptiness. You're wrong, Jonathan. You can cage me, but you can't bury the truth, and I will not stop. The camera lingers on her face, the flicker of resolve breaking through despair. The cold cell isn't just a prison, it's a crucible, and inside it, Amelia is no longer the forgotten daughter. She is something sharper, something forged in betrayal. And as the minutes crawl past, the betrayal only deepens into a vow. She will fight, she will burn if she must, but she will not let them win.
The clang of the cell door unlocking at dawn was the sound of borrowed freedom. Amelia hadn't slept, her eyes swollen from staring at the cracks in the concrete ceiling. When the officer muttered her name and motioned for her to follow, her stomach tightened with suspicion. But when she stepped into the fluorescent-lit lobby of the precinct, she saw him. Ethan Rhodes, her colleague from the paper, his tie crooked, his expression tight with worry. "I posted bail," he said quickly, avoiding the judgmental glares of the officers nearby. "Don't ask how, just let's get you out of here before they change their minds." Outside, the city felt harsher, its noise cutting straight into her ears after the suffocating quiet of the cell. Amelia clutched her coat tighter around her, though the spring air wasn't cold. The chill came from within. The memory of her mother's accusations, Jonathan's smugness, Emma's silence. Ethan hailed a cab and shoved her inside. "You can't go back home," he told her flatly. "They'll watch you. They'll make sure you don't touch a single paper that could expose them. If you're going to fight this, you need proof that nobody can deny." Proof. The word burned like fire. That was the only weapon left. Between 2200 and 2500 minutes, the story sharpens. Amelia moves in shadows. She slips into quiet cafes where contacts meet her in whispers, where the clink of porcelain cups masks the urgency in their voices. A bank employee, someone young, nervous, sweat collecting on his temples, slides a folder across the table. "You didn't get this from me," he mutters. Inside are records that show unusual withdrawals, loans stacking upon loans under Jonathan's name. His empire wasn't thriving. It was crumbling. Later, under the dim light of a rented office, Amelia sits across from a handwriting expert. He studies the forged signature through a magnifying lens, his brows knitting together. "This is no doubt fraudulent," he declares, tapping the paper with his pen. "Whoever did this tried to mimic weakness in the stroke, but they overdid it. Your father's real signature carried steadiness even when his health declined. This is a performance, not authenticity." The confirmation is both vindication and agony. Amelia feels her chest tighten as she tucks the analysis into her file. Her father's name had been desecrated, twisted into a pawn in Jonathan's hunger.
From 2500 to 2800, the revelations grow darker.
The bank records reveal more than debt. They show intent. Jonathan had been circling like a vulture, eyeing her childhood home, the one fortress of memory that still carried her father's breath. He had already approached lenders, presenting the property as collateral for yet another desperate loan. The walls Amelia grew up inside, the floorboards that creaked beneath her and Emma's childhood games, were about to be handed over to strangers. Her vision blurred with fury. Jonathan wasn't just greedy, he was desperate, and desperation made men dangerous. She pictured her father's face, the steady pride in his eyes, and then saw Jonathan's smirk superimposed over it. Her fists clenched until her nails carved crescents into her palms. But what shredded her most wasn't Jonathan. It was Emma. Her sister knew. The documents bore her initials. The deals had been signed with her approval, her compliance. She hadn't been coerced, she had chosen. By 28:30, Amelia's voiceover trembles with pain. Why, Emma? Why did you trade me for him? Why did you choose money, comfort, illusion over your own sister? We used to whisper secrets under the blankets. We used to dream of running away from Mom's coldness together. When did you stop being my sister? When did you start becoming my enemy? The ache was worse than the handcuffs had been. Betrayal from Jonathan she expected. Betrayal from Emma cut to the marrow. She stands before the mirror of her rented room, staring at the reflection of a woman, hollowed out by family, but hardened by truth. The circles under her eyes are deep, her lips dry, but there's something else there now. Steel. The documents spread across the bed behind her aren't just papers. They're weapons. Weapons that could level Jonathan's empire and expose the rot within her family. Between 30 and 32, the decision comes like a blade slicing the air. She could walk away, leave New York, leave them all to choke on their lies and collapse under their own greed. She could protect herself, keep her career intact, and let the past rot where it belonged. But her father's voice haunted her. Truth is your inheritance. Don't let them bury it. So she chooses.
Amelia gathers the files, every contract, every bank record, every analysis, and places them carefully into her satchel. She knows what this means. The end of Emma as her sister, the end of family as she once defined it. She will expose Jonathan, she will expose Emma, she will drag their corruption into daylight, even if it burns every bridge left standing. The narration is clear, cold, resolute. I will lose them forever. But better to lose a family built on lies than to lose myself. The camera lingers on Amelia's face, her eyes rimmed with pain but shining with fire. The clock ticks. The city outside roars indifferently. And Amelia Torres, once silenced at her own dinner table, prepares to make the truth louder than her family ever imagined. The fight is no longer a choice. It is destiny. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished oak and tension. The benches groaned under the weight of silent bodies, reporters with sharpened pens, townspeople drawn by whispers of scandal, and officials who pretended disinterest but could not resist leaning forward. At the center of it all sat Amelia, her posture rigid, her satchel of evidence perched like a shield beside her. 32-0 to 34-0 unspools with breathless gravity. The judge, stern and deliberate, calls the hearing to order. Across the aisle, Jonathan sits flanked by his attorney, his suit pressed but his eyes restless, like a predator trapped in a cage. Beside him, Emma avoids her sister's gaze, twisting her wedding ring until her knuckle reddens. Their mother,
regal as ever, looks at Amelia with something between disdain and pity, as if her daughter were a misbehaving child rather than the one standing for truth. Then the screens light up. One by one, the forged contracts are displayed for the court. The expert's testimony overlays the projection. This is imitation, not authentic. The bank records follow, showing Jonathan's debts stacked higher than the courthouse walls. His attempts to mortgage the family home caught in cold, unforgiving ink. Gasps ripple through the gallery. Each document is another nail hammered into Jonathan's polished facade. Amelia does not look away. She keeps her eyes fixed on Emma, silently demanding an explanation, a flicker of remorse. Emma's face crumbles, tears threatening, but she says nothing. Their mother shifts uncomfortably, yet pride still pins her lips shut. Between 3400 and 3700, the unraveling begins. Jonathan's composure shatters. He slams his hand against the defense table, papers scattering like frightened birds. His voice rises, sharp and venomous, hurling accusations at Amelia, at the court, even at Emma. You think you can take me down with scraps of paper? I built this family. I kept us alive while her, he points a shaking finger at Amelia, scribbled articles and played detective. But fury is a dangerous ally. In his rage, Jonathan admits too much, acknowledging debts, hinting at manipulation, spitting truths he'd buried under lies. The judge pounds his gavel, ordering silence, but the air is already electrified. Jonathan's chest heaves as if he's been unmasked, his breath ragged, his eyes wild. And then desperation overtakes him. With a sudden movement, he bolts from his chair, lunging toward the aisle, as if escape were still possible. Gasps explode through the room. Uniformed officers react instantly, pinning him against the polished floor before he can reach the exit. His shout echoes, guttural and panicked. "You'll regret this, Amelia! You'll regret it all!" The sight is grotesque. A powerful man reduced to thrashing in chains of his own making. Cameras flash, capturing forever the image of Jonathan's downfall. Amelia sits frozen, not triumphant, but hollow, as though witnessing not victory, but the carcass of what used to be her family. From 3700 to 4000, judgment arrives like a hammer. The judge, voice steady and unflinching, declares the fraudulent contracts null and void. The family estate, once hijacked by greed, is to be restored, divided fairly according to law. Justice, at least in legal form, has spoken. Then comes the verdict that cleaves the room in two. Jonathan is found guilty of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. His ally, the family lawyer who had once sat at their dinner table, who had toasted their holidays, is also condemned, his betrayal branded criminal in the record books. Sentences are read, prison terms that would strip them of years, if not their entire reputations. Amelia breathes, but it feels foreign. She turns, and for the first time, Emma's mask slips entirely. Tears stream unchecked as she is named complicit, her part in the scheme laid bare. She collapses into sobs, not graceful, not rehearsed, but raw. The courtroom watches, some with pity, others with contempt. For Amelia, it is agony twisted into vindication. She had longed for Emma's honesty, but not like this, not in public, not torn open by the law's unforgiving blade. Their mother closes her eyes, shoulders trembling. For the first time, the matriarch looks small, her power dimmed by the truth she can no longer deny. She doesn't defend Jonathan, nor Emma, nor herself. She simply bows her head,
Silent. The judge strikes the gavel one final time. The case is closed. The courtroom exhales. And Amelia? She sits rooted to the bench, the noise around her fading. Justice has been delivered, but justice tastes bitter. She has reclaimed her father's legacy, but at the price of her family's ruin. Her sister's tears haunt her more than Jonathan's curses. Yet she knows her father's voice was right. Truth is your inheritance. Don't let them bury it. As the screen fades on 40:00, the image lingers on Amelia's face. Tired, tear-streaked, yet resolute. She has not just fought for fairness in property or law. She has fought for herself, for the right to stand without shame, for the promise that lies, no matter how deeply rooted, cannot choke out truth forever. The conflict is over, but its echoes will haunt every member of that courtroom for the rest of their lives. The old house stood like a wounded sentinel against the skyline, its shutters creaking with the sigh of memories Amelia had tried for years to bury. At 4000 she arrived alone, the air crisp with early morning chill. The gravel crunched beneath her shoes as she paused at the gate. The house wasn't just bricks and beams, it was laughter echoing in the hallway, her father's voice weaving lessons into ordinary moments, and the cold glares of betrayal that had poisoned its final years. The weight of all of it pressed into her chest, urging her to decide. Cling to a mausoleum of grief or sever the chain. She ran her fingers along the weathered frame of the doorway. For a fleeting second, she pictured Emma's laughter from childhood, her mother's stern call for dinner, Jonathan's once charming grin. Yet those ghosts were no longer companions. They were shackles. Amelia inhaled sharply, the scent of damp wood thick in her lungs, and whispered to herself, "This house will not own me anymore." With that, she chose to sell it, refusing to let bricks drenched in betrayal define her future. It was not an act of destruction, it was release. By 4200, the decision had transformed into purpose. The sale closed quickly, the money resting in her account like a silent promise. Amelia didn't splurge on a new life of luxury. Instead, she met with lawyers, advocates, and social workers to craft something larger than herself, the Children's Equity Fund. Its mission was clear: protect those stripped of fairness before they even had a chance to fight. Amelia sat in sterile offices drafting charters, her heart thrumming with urgency as she explained her vision. Scholarships for children denied inheritance, legal aid for minors exploited by guardians, therapy for kids forced into silence. Each clause she signed felt like stitching a wound, not just hers, but those of countless others. The fund's launch was quiet, unglamorous. No ribbon cutting, no cameras, just a small circle of volunteers and Amelia herself, her voice steady as she declared, "This is not charity. This is justice passed forward." It was in those moments she felt her father's spirit, not confined to an old house, but alive in the justice she carved from pain. Between 4400 and 4500, her journey reached its quiet crescendo. On the streets of New York, Amelia walked with a lightness she hadn't known in years. The city buzzed around her, taxis honking, vendors shouting, skyscrapers stretching like ambitions into the sky, and in the middle of it, she smiled. Not the fragile smile of someone clinging to survival, but the grounded smile of a woman who had built meaning from ruin. She stopped near a corner cafe, watching children dart between their parents' legs, their laughter untainted by betrayal. That sight carved something deeper into her resolve. She had lost her family, yes, but she had chosen a wider definition of kinship, those who deserved protection, dignity, and a chance. Her final words lingered, spoken not just to herself but to anyone who might listen.
Family can betray us, but justice and compassion will rewrite the definition of kinship. The statement carried no bitterness, only clarity, as if she had distilled years of struggle into one truth.
As the camera closed in, Amelia stepped forward into the golden light spilling across New York's avenues. The city, vast and indifferent, seemed to part just enough for her to claim her own path. The smile on her lips wasn't for what she had lost, but for the chapter she was ready to begin. And so, the story ended, not with the silence of defeat, but with the resonance of rebirth, a woman walking away from ruins into radiance, carrying justice like a torch for those still trapped in the dark.